up, guys? It's Dave, it's Duncan, back from Metal Epidemic for another album review. And for this review, Duncan and I have been checking out the new album from Chicago-based Avant-Garde overlords, Yakuza. The band's new album, Sutra, will be released on May 19th via Svart Records. Formed in 1999...
What are you calling that for?
99?
Dave, we were alive and we were
I know that.
technically adults in 1999. So let's rein back the how long ago that was. Oh,
I'm not insinuating that they're old. I'm just saying I'd never heard of these guys until this album.
Oh, so. Right. I see where you're coming from. Like,
okay.
Yep.
Glad I could just clarify.
You clarify that before you start commenting. Old dick. Have none of this pish.
The heavy hybridizers Yakuza are in a genre all of its own, with Pitchfork describing them as a specialised and strange alloy. So eclectic and hard to pigeonhole, their music has been described over the years as everything from avant-garde metal, progressive metal, alternative metal to experimental rock, jazz, metal, art metal and post-metal, incorporating psychedelic rock jams that sprawl into heavy sludging doom with jazz influences, while also incorporating breakneck grind riffs and grooves, makes Yakuza's new album Sutra a long-awaited and insanely enjoyable feast of frequencies. Over 10 years after their last release, Yakuza have returned, losing none of their expansive and wildly artistic approach to pushing the boundary of heavy music. The album was recorded and mixed by Sanford Parker at Decade Studios and Hypercube, then mastered by Colin Jordan at the Boiler Room. So, Duncan.
So, Dave.
Completely new band.
Well, if they've not put an album, like, think about it, do the math here. If they've not put an album out in 10 years, right, that's, 2013 was their last album. 2013 would have been when we were doing, in its infancy, our previous review site, which was formed in 2012, 2013 . So, if that album didn't come in then,
yeah,
you know what I mean? Like
2012, I think, was their last one, I think.
Yeah, like the avenues of us finding music now is very, very, very different. Like, I feel like we're better connected to like that. So I do feel like if you had I don't think Yakuza naturally fit into a genre that either one of us were necessarily all eyes over back then. So I'm not surprised that we haven't. I'm just surprised that I've not since heard anything about them. Like legacy-wise, influence-wise, or anything. Like, to me, this felt like Dave's found a new band.
Yeah, primarily because it was Svart, to be honest. When I saw them on that label, I was like, okay, right, we need to check this out as we regularly review the Svart releases. So, what do we make of this? Duncan, what did you think of Sutra by Yakuza?
Watch me drop a line and do a shot. There's a lot to like about Sutra, Dave. Like, there's elements on this album that I think when they land are like hugely rewarding and had me smiling from ear to ear. It's probably worth saying they either have a guest, and this is my lack of knowledge because I don't read the press statement, ladies and gents. They either have a designated saxophone player in the band, or they had like a saxophone player on hand in the studio for the majority of the recording session. There's a ton of sax in this, like loads and loads and loads of sax, and it's utilised. What are you about to tell me? You need to find information while we record this, Dave, so we can come across as educated and not on the fly. Right. And those moments stood out to me because they're used in such a really interesting way in the recording. At times, to add an extra layer of melody, at other times actually to add a layer of kind of discord to the sound. And I think those elements that weave in, maybe more predominantly towards the end of the album than the front of the album, are actually really, really interesting. It's mixed and recorded perfectly as well, that it doesn't overpower anything in there. I think sometimes when bands, especially in this genre, decide to shove a little bit of saxophone in, it's cranked up quite loud, because look, we've got a saxophone player, it's big fucking Steve in the back playing sax. That's not there. It's mixed very, very well. There's a lot going on. There's the kind of fuzzy psychedelic stuff they mentioned. There are huge swaths of fucking Mastodon in here. I'm surprised Sludge wasn't mentioned anywhere in there, because there are moments of Sludge, a little kind of sousson of doom dropped in there as well. But
Yeah.
its most part, it's a kind of combo of kind of erratic, kind of proggy, fuzzy, like rock metal. A little bit of noise rock in there as well, and it works. I think the journeys, another shot, the journeys that some of the songs actually take you on in the longer forms are really rewarding. Tracks like Echoes of the Sky, which comes in about the 6.5 minute mark, gives you like takes you from swaths of like a Mastodon through into some of the quieter moments that you might have got on something like Cave-In. And it, weaves those sims really, 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 really well. I think moments where some of the instrumentation of the saxophone on a track like Burn Before Reading, where it takes more of a prominence in the sound, really, really, really work. There are a couple of tracks where I think there's maybe one step too far or one idea that goes on a little bit longer than it should, but I have to address the elephant in the room for me when it comes to this album. I was acutely aware very, very, very early on that there was something going on with the vocals that I didn't full-throatedly get behind. I'm assuming, because of the band's longevity, that this is deliberate and on purpose, but the vocalist, and it might be the effect sometimes because there's a slight delay on the vocal sometimes, but I also think there's a conscious effort in some songs where he is not singing in key. And it's not that the music's so discordant that there isn't a key to ground on. There's clearly a root chord, there's clearly a root note there, and whatever he's singing is not in the same key. And if it was every now and again, it would be fine, but it is more than 70% of the vocals on this one are like maybe a semitone out of key to the point that they're noticeable.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest, distracting to me. I found myself on subsequent listens being able to enjoy the music behind it a little bit more, but on the first listen I was wincing a lot, not because it was the most stank riff I'd ever heard in my entire life, but rather I was praying for like the vocals to naturally set on a key. I think because it's on here, it's a conscious choice. I don't think that. I think it's another element of what the band's doing to add a texture or tone on there. It's nothing I've seen a band do before, so to me it's not something that I can liken it to another 4 or 5 acts and say they're really playing with this. And it's also the reason I think it's not a gimmick but a conscious choice is there are certain tracks where the vocals are perfectly in key and sit like very comfortable and do their thing on there. So it's weird. It's kind of almost in the parts where he's doing melodic shouting. It's like he's never either quite hitting the note or he's overshooting it a little bit. As a result of that, the first couple of listens were, it's not unpleasant, it's not the right word, but they were distracting. That I kept feeling like there's something here and I'm not getting it. On the third and final listen for the album, I think that's where I started to appreciate more of the music in the background. It's still an issue for me, if I'm honest. I can't see I full-heartedly support the style there. But then, who the fuck am I? I'm a guy sitting in a room with a microphone who got the album for free and I'm talking about it. I imagine if you're a fan of Yakuza, then you are acclimated to what they do with that, and as a result, that's just part of their sound. Certain vocalists over time have grown on me. Like their vocal choices have taken maybe 1 or 2 albums from me to go, right, I get it and I'm going with it now. Others hit me instantly. I am not sure, even with a lot of time with this album in their back catalogue, if I'll ever be fully on board with it. As a vocalist and a synth player, I'm acclimated to being key. That's just my thing. So when something is deliberately not in key and not for minor effect, but predominantly through whole parts of songs, it becomes very distracting to me. Hands down, though, the music's fucking great. I think the mix is awesome. I think the only issue, and I mentioned it before, is occasionally those quote-unquote jazz elements he mentioned in there can take the track a little bit too far off to the side. They always bring it back.
Yeah.
But for me, there's maybe one or two elements in certain tracks that push things out a little bit far. Once again, it sounds like that's their nature. So it's kind of like they have the freedom to explore those spaces and they're doing it. So yeah, I don't know. I'm a bit conflicted on this one. You see it when we come to the grade at the end. I think there's a lot in this that works. I think there's a big element that doesn't work for me. And there's some elements go on a little bit further than they should.
Right.
And that is where I'm landing with Sutra. Dave. How about you?
Conflicted is definitely a word I would use. Yeah, I have changed my mind about this album so many times over the last week. But I have made my mind up about it now.
That's good. By the time we've recorded,
yes. Good timing. I'm a drummer, time is my thing. Took me a while, but I finally got there. So yeah, even though they've been about for 20 years, I had never heard of them before. The last album was 2012, which I didn't listen to prior to listening to this, and I usually do that. I usually go back and listen to something else before I hear the new album, but I didn't. I have heard it now, but I didn't listen to it before I heard the new album. I'd heard the first single, Alice, and I liked what I'd heard from that track. It was probably a wise choice of single because although it's got a bit of an experimental streak, it's probably one of the more accessible tracks on the album. It's kind of sludgy. It's got a cool groove, a little bit of like a Kowloon walled city kind of discordant melody in the guitars. There's a little bit, maybe a little touch of like Helmet in there, and the vocals are definitely interesting, but nothing that I was like hugely worried about when I heard the single. When I put the album on to play, that first track did not fill me with joy, Duncan. I was like, what is going on? What is happening here? That first track, it had little moments that kind of had a little bit of like Baroness in there, but like way more unusual than Baroness. And vocally, I was the same. I just did not gel with the vocal style on that first track.
It's like there's an effect on it. And there is an effect on it. There is like a delay on it, but there's like an effect, like a weird modulator that's just put it just at a reach of the key.
Yeah, it is a weird style. And I was kind of confused initially because I was like, the single it wasn't as jarring as this was. Thankfully, track 2 is Alice, so I was kind of like back on board when I got into track 2. I was like, oh yeah, right, okay, I like this. And then Echoes from the Sky started. And again, there was moments where I was kind of locked into it and I was like, okay, I'm quite enjoying this. It's got a experimental kind of sludge kind of feel to it. And then there were moments where the kind of boundaries were pushed beyond my limits of kind of tolerance, I suppose. And in those moments, I wasn't totally sure how I felt about it. Because vocally I felt like it kept taking me out of the album, and I didn't feel like I was fully letting myself enjoy the experience because of that. But then there were moments on this album where I totally got on board, like tracks like Burn Before Reading, some absolutely killer riffs on this, really good vocal hooks, and the experimental side, it doesn't come over like too overpowering. Into Forever was another really good track, really cool mix of styles. It's got a really kind of slow, kind of grooving, kind of sludge feel to it with this like kind of brass creating a discordant kind of atmosphere in the background. There was moments where I felt like it was almost leaning into like a kind of Vision of Disorder type hardcore, which I loved. But then there's this kind of like Mastodon style vocal part as well.
Yeah.
So I really enjoyed that. Then there are sections of this album where they lean right into that kind of avant-garde streak, and the guitars and vocals sound purposefully kind of unpleasant, and that's a kind of stylistic thing. I don't mind avant-garde, like the Ashen Spire album from last year I really liked. Yep. I like bands like Effelduath, Imperial Triumphant, or Ansi Pazuzu, bands like that. I don't have a problem with them at all. There are also other bands of that genre that I just do not click with at all. The Die Catafalque album we reviewed a couple of years ago just didn't do anything for me at all. This wasn't as unpleasant as that album was. It just took me a longer amount of time to kind of adjust to it. I did about 5 listens to this album, and I felt like it definitely benefited me giving it that amount of listens, because it's an album that there's a lot going on. A lot of it is a lot on the line of like being kind of too discordant for me.
Yeah.
And I still wouldn't say like I'm shouting from the rooftops about it, but I can listen to it now without disconnecting from it. Because I think there's a lot of positives. I think
That's what I'm saying. When it all syncs up,
yeah,
fucking great.
Yeah, I think it's really well performed. Like, I can't take anything away from the playing. The guitar work is really creative. It's distinctive. The placement of the saxophone, and I think it's a clarinet, are in places that I would place them myself. So I felt like compositionally, it feels like there's been plenty of thought gone into it, and the arrangement of the tracks are well executed. Production wise as well, I think it sounds great. I think it fits their style like a glove. It's not overproduced. It's still very, very organic sounding, which suits that kind of sludgy tone. And the bits of brass and woodwind that they used throughout the release sound great as well. It reminded me a little bit of that Ash Inspire album from last year, but this is maybe slightly heavier, a little bit more bite to it. I wouldn't say that this is an album that has like huge hooks. A lot of avant-garde stuff doesn't have that, but so there's kind of parts of this album that didn't really stay with me afterwards. But weirdly, it's an album that kind of kept enticing me to come back and have another listen, because it is so different and quite fascinating. They have a very unique sound. So if you're looking for something that will push the boundaries and like not fall into a predictable formula, then this might be right up your street. I've definitely grown to like it much more than I did on the first listen, but it did take me a bit of time to come around to it. So scoring for this, where would you score this album? Like, where would you place it?
So it's difficult because regardless what sort of music you play, the focal point of a band is the vocalist. So, and if that becomes a distraction, then it becomes difficult to quantify it. Musically speaking, I would say this is a 4-star album. I think as an album overall, with all the elements put together, I think it's a 3-star album.
Okay.
And it's a shame, because I'll tell you right now, tracks like Into Forever are just like headbanging, devil horns throwing fucking good shit.
Yeah.
And for every track you get like that, you get 2 is one where you're just like almost kind of sitting scratching your head as to how this ended up being on the recording. So yeah, I think, like I said before, I think if you're acclimated to that sound, I can't imagine anything I'm saying is making you less want to throw something at your computer screen at the moment. I apologise for that. This is my first experience with the band. I don't know if I'll ever sign on fully with what they're doing, but I'd be lying if I said I wasn't intrigued. I didn't find bits where I genuinely thought this is great. So I'm going to go with my heart, and that's a 3 out of 5.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, I was sitting around that for the majority of the week, but I felt like on the last couple of listens, it's crept up a little bit more. So I'm going to go 3.5. I think this is a very unique sounding album. I'll definitely give them that. They have a very unique sound that doesn't sound like a lot of other bands, to be honest. It could be a love it or hate it type album, like people like they're checking this out for the first time. But give it a go, because it's definitely interesting. There's definitely a lot to enjoy on this as well. And it's definitely got a bit of originality about it. So yeah, I'm definitely go 3.5 on this one. So that is the new album from Yakuza. It's called Sutra. It's out on May 19th on Svart Records. Links below to the band, to the pre-order, Bandcamp, all that sort of stuff. Check it out. Let us know what you think. Have a little listen. Happy to hear your thoughts on it. That is the review. Thank you for checking it out. We'll be back with another review very soon. But until then, take care. Speak to you soon.
Bye, everyone.